everybody, and welcome to another episode of the CVCS podcast. In these introductory episodes, we are talking to school leaders about how the podcast network can potentially affect our school going forward. You've already heard me talk to Mr. Choi, our head of schools, and now I'm going to begin the conversations with our three principals to talk specifically about each sort of level. Is level the word for that?
Yeah, department level.
Each level of the school. So we're starting today talking with Miss Marnie Day, and she is our elementary principal. Can we start just having you tell us a little bit about yourself, if there's people out there listening that don't really know you? How did you come to CVCS? How did you get involved in education? What's your story?
I'm old, so my story is long, but I'll try and give you the Reader's Digest version of that. But I'm just really thankful that at a young age, I knew I wanted to be a teacher. Just had a really awesome conversation with a senior who's like, I don't even know what I want to be when I grow up. And you know, that I get that. Like, shouldn't have to know when you're 18, but super grateful that even as a child, like, I would line up my stuffed animals and like give them tests, right? I just wanted to be a teacher. And so that was kind of the theme through my life that kind of kept me going. And I've taught everything. I taught 17 years in the public school, and I loved my time in the public school with my fellow educators, and then took the plunge to private Christian education. And last year was my halfway year. So 17 years in public school, 17 years in Christian school. So this is my deal breaker.
This is now the new majority.
So Christian education is my new majority, and I can't imagine doing education without Jesus being at the center of everything that we do.
Oh, absolutely.
And so I've taught everything, kindergarten through 12th grade, done special ed. I get bored.
Sure.
So that's a great thing about being a principal is like every day is different. And
never boring.
Never boring. And I never wanted to be a principal. I was in the classroom for 30 years, and the Lord had to make it abundantly clear that that's where he was calling me. Yeah. And so sometimes I forget I'm the principal of the school, but it is such a privilege. I see myself as the shepherd, you know, and my job is to lead and to serve. And it is, I can't imagine doing anything else. Yeah. So it's so
That's
great.
Wonderful. Introduce our audience a little bit to the elementary school at CVCS. Yeah. What do we have going on here? What do teachers do? What are teachers like? All that.
Yeah. So I love the elementary school. I love all of our departments.
Of course.
And they're all awesome in their own unique ways. But a couple things that I love about the elementary school is our staff. Like my team of teachers is like nothing I've ever seen put together. One, they are all excellent at their craft. They are dynamic educators. They are gifted in differentiating instruction. They see each student as an individual through the eyes of Jesus. But they also are great at creating community, like a loving community. But they also, each one of them has an active, living relationship with our Heavenly Father. And so that spills out into everything. In the classroom, with each other. We were just talking the other day in our staff meeting about how, like, this is family. Like, we just want time to hang out because we build each other up. And I'm like, we should just hold on to this. It's like, because, you don't know what's coming next. But it is a great place to work. I think one of the things that I really like about our elementary school that we tell parents and our students all the time is we do hard things. Like, we do really hard things, and sometimes it might be in a subject area like math, or it might be standing up for someone who's being left out, really proclaiming my faith when there might be adversity to that, breaking off fear of man, and understanding that your identity is in who you are in Jesus Christ, and fear of God is the only fear that we should have. And I tell parents, like, we do hard things and your kids are going to cry, but don't you want them to work those things out where they're surrounded by people that are going to put them at the feet of Jesus, and they have these coping skills. We don't want our kids to, like, the first time they experience true adversity be when they're in college and they don't know how to work through it.
That's right.
So we have this motto of, like, CVC, we're thinking of making these sweatshirts, like CVCS ... where we do hard things and God meets us there.
That's right.
And our kids will say that to one another. We have I love going in the classrooms and kids just participate and they don't have the right answer, and it's okay.
Yeah.
Lots of risk taking, right? And I don't have it all figured out, and problem solving and all of those things. And we're not perfect.
Sure.
But we do make much about Jesus every single day, and that's something I want to be a part of.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that what you talked about of this being an environment where the things can get kind of wrestled out safely and comfortably. I remember at my previous school, which was just a high school, talking about that in our Bible department, and even, with 11th, 12th graders talking about apologetics and hard questions and hot topics and stuff. And we had the exact same mentality. Yeah. And it's amazing that is applicable across any age grade level at a Christian school.
Well,
it's something
absolutely.
we're unique at. Yeah.
Yeah, we have the world is like going after our kids, right? And not like in a overly dramatic way, but it's super biblical, right?
Yeah.
The thief, he comes to kill and destroy. Yeah. And so a lot of my time is spent, I'll have like 8 fifth grade boys in my office, and then I'll get an email from a parent saying, "Oh, I heard my son was in your office. Why didn't you call me?" I said, because we're learning how to be young men according to the Bible. So like, the world tells us, oh, if you're in my friend group, we're going to sit around and roast each other at the lunch table. And so I just get them in there and I'm like, does anybody not get their feelings hurt when someone's roasting? And then when you create that environment, then I'm roasting so no one will roast me. And I'm like, let's look into the word. Like, what does God say? Like, is that iron sharpening iron? And people will say, and then I'll just say, like, what did you say to him to roast? And the boy, he loves him. He's his friend, like crying as he's saying it. I'm like, did that not hurt you? And he's crying, and we're all crying, and then we're all praying together. And it's like, we're just learning how to be disciples of Jesus. Yeah. And the world tells them a completely different narrative. Yeah. And so it's such a privilege to say, look, this is how we're supposed to do it, and look how that brings life. Yeah. As opposed to like what the world says, and it leads to death. Like no one's feeling great. Yeah. So what a privilege.
It's like this added layer of community protection, safety, not necessarily just out of fear, but it just in terms of just who we are. In fact, maybe even calling it a layer is a misnomer. It's the core. It's not an outside kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's not a bubble.
Yeah.
Like people say, oh, the Christian bubble. I'm like, oh no, we got people dealing with real hard things here.
Yes.
We're not a bubble. I like the word insulate. Sure. Because I think of a thermos, like, we're not all walking around with iPhones in 4th grade. Like, no, that's what the world tells us. Yeah. And we're like, yeah, no, we're not doing that. Right. Like, we're doing kingdom things. Yeah. So it's so great.
I love that. Yeah? Last little thing before we get to talking about the podcast network, which is kind of why we're here. Yeah. But I ran these questions and these topics by the class that I teach that does all of the podcast producing. And they had a chance to add their own questions and what do you want to ask school leaders and stuff. Yeah. The one question they all kind of rallied around was pretty specifically nothing to do with a podcast network per se, but just what is your idea of a perfect school? If you could define a perfect school, what would it look like?
Yeah, that's good, because I know we have to be about really awesome buildings. Sure. And really great, those kinds of things. But I've never been a person who's about how we look. I'm more about like what's on the inside, like what are we doing?
Who are we?
Yes, first and foremost, we are an educational institution. Yeah. So we want to have great teachers with excellent curriculum where our students have access to that and kids are challenged in areas where they're excelling and they need to be challenged, but kids are also supported until they get where they're supposed to be. So I feel like I have that. I have that in my teachers. I have that in our curriculum. And I think a school, we're Capistrano Valley Christian School, right? Yeah. And I'm always checking in to make sure like we have Christian in our name. Is that what we're about? And not in a legalistic way, but this is God's school. We tell kids all the time, this is God's school, and great things happen here because we invite Holy Spirit in, right? And my teachers will even say like, wow, that lesson was so great. And I said, is that how you planned it to go? They're like, no. I'm like, Holy Spirit will just lead.
It's the best feeling.
Like God is so much better than we are. So there is no perfect school, but I'm feeling like this is a little slice of heaven. Right. Wednesdays are chapel days, and we get to go in there and we get to worship the Lord. Yes. And it just wrecks me every week. You have the youngers that are just so innocently worshiping.
That's amazing.
And then we have the older kids where it's like, okay, we have some new students. Are you still good? And you're older. You're 6th grade now. When you were in 4th grade, like you weren't so cool. And you worship the Lord with abandonment. Are you still going to do that? Yeah. And they do. Yeah. Like it wrecks me every week. Sure. And so we don't have the perfect school because I have broken teachers and broken students, and I'm a wretched sinner saved by grace, but we all want to be about the Father's business, and I believe that we are called to provide excellent, rigorous academic education, partner with biblical worldview in everything that we do. It's pretty, I mean, that question is so great that you asked, because sometimes when you lead a school, like there's so many things, you're like putting out fires and doing this, and it's like, no, Marnie, lift up your eyes. Like, look at what I've given you. Like, look at what we have here. So
what's going on?
Not to paint the picture of like rainbows and unicorns and everything. But how blessed are we?
Yeah,
I'm so blessed. I can't imagine doing anything else anywhere else.
Yes.
I mean, if the Lord calls me, we'll have to have an argument and wrestle if he calls me somewhere else. But like right now, I'm just like, and our parents. So our parents partner so well with us.
Yes.
Like that is key. Like we are all on the same page. We work together. We praise together. We disciple, discipline together. It's so good.
Yeah.
Like you have to have that. You have to have the parents supporting and partnering with you so that you have the freedom. There has to be trust.
Yes.
So we are so blessed that we have parents that trust us every day. They drop off their, we get their two most valuable commodities. We get their money and their kids.
That's right.
Right? And they trust us every day. And it wouldn't be what it is without the parents.
Yeah.
Our teachers feel supported and loved. I feel supported and loved.
Yeah.
And I think the parents feel that their students are supported and loved. So it's pretty awesome.
Right. It's wonderful. Yeah. There's a lot of imperfections about CVCS, but there are a lot of, maybe calling them perfections is a stretch, but you get we have so much of what you defined as a perfect school here, and it's a blessing to be here.
100%.
You also mentioned the chapel messages, and a quick plug for the chapel podcast feed being a thing. You can listen to that on our network. You can hear every single chapel message. One of my favorite parts about editing and publishing the elementary chapels specifically is you hear the students in the background.
Yes.
We're only recording the speaker's microphone.
Yeah.
But if there's ever a question or if there's a response, anything like that, you hear just this roar of feedback and praise or anything coming through.
Yeah.
And that is, frankly, you don't get that in the junior high school chapels. And there's other reasons why.
for that,
But it's such a beautiful, fascinating every week.
It's so life-giving. Even the people that come and speak, like, they leave blessed because, and our kids know the Bible so well. We use the Deep Roots curriculum, and I was, at the last minute, found out last week I was speaking in chapel and was speaking on Abram, all of that. And I was like, okay, I'm going to speak to the youngers first, like JK through third grade, and I'm going to say, okay, what do you know about Abraham? Yeah. And those kids had like 15 facts, and I was like, wait. And then they said, oh yeah, we just got done studying that in Deep Roots, but I was like, wow, like I was so blown away. I was expecting them to say, the song Father Abraham. But
I started taking notes.
Yes, I was like, wait, who's teaching the chapel here? Stop the bus. What's going on? It's so life-giving. Like Seth Ebel was here today, and he was like, Marnie, I love coming and talking in your chapels. I love watching the kids worship, and that's just a shout out. That's an invitation. Parents, if you're listening to this, like, we love it when the parents come to chapel. We have a handful of same parents that come every week, but like, it's great. Like, it's good dinner conversation. Like, come and worship the Lord with your kid. Yes. The kids can sit with you or they can stay with their class. But like, I would love to have 50 parents here every Wednesday. Yeah. Like, that's what we're about, right? That's right. So that's my plug.
I love that. Yeah, wonderful. Plenty of opportunities to hear chapel in person or on the network. It's, like you said, a huge part of our community intentionally. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the podcast network. That's ultimately why we're here, right?
Yes.
I'm excited about so many things. You and I have both said so many things at the school. For me and my job specifically, the podcast network has almost instantly jumped to one of those top spots of the things I'm doing here. And the things that it's really just popping off around campus in a lot of ways. The purposes of these conversations is sitting down with school leaders, sitting down with, in this case, principals, talking about the podcast network and how it can affect, we don't have to limit it to academics, but let's say the elementary school. And if you want to talk about that, or if you even want to start with maybe this is a funny question. When you first heard CVCS is going to have a podcast network,
yes.
What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, kind of, I'm embarrassed to say this, but,
That's okay.
I just don't know how, all I know is honest.
Sure.
I was like, oh, that's so great for the high school. Another thing for the high school,
Sure.
and I was like, but then just talking with you about things, and then that day that you came to our staff meeting and you introduced it, and like you left and we talked for about an hour about the way that we can use those things.
I
and
love
it. I want our students in here. I want our students using this. I want it to be an extension of what we're doing in academics.
Yes.
But we've also talked about, our students do SOAP devotions, right?
Yeah. Scripture,
Observation, Application, and Prayer. And those are really deep.
Yes.
Like you read some of those students, what they've written, and I'm like, wow, that is so raw and honest and amazing.
Yeah.
So we want to do like a SOAP podcast where kids come in and they share their SOAPs. We want them to be bold in their faith.
I love it.
And so those kinds of things. But like talking about mummification or in Egypt and then asking students like, what are questions that you would use to interview, a pharaoh? What are some things that you would use? And coming up with that, it makes everything so real.
Yeah.
It connects, even though it's not like a person or whatever, but it's like, oh, this is history.
Yeah.
But this is real.
That's right.
Right? So like who do you want to interview? We were talking about how the fifth graders do the wax museum and they're all someone famous and the fifth graders are all going to vote and say which one of these, like each class will pick one, but who should we interview? So maybe it'll be Helen Keller. And then like have someone like role play and be like, this is how Harriet Tubman would respond. This is how Helen Keller would respond. Those kinds of things, And even in science, like someone come in and do like a weather forecast. Like this is what it's going to look like. It's pretty cool,
There's so many possibilities. And it's funny you mentioned the role-playing aspect.
Yes.
That's something we're actually building right now for Miss Ernest's conceptual physics class.
Yeah.
She has them do a research project. This is a high school class where they have to research like a famous scientist from history, develop all these facts about their life and accomplishments and stuff. And she came to me and said, can we make this a podcast? And after a couple conversations of massaging this idea, what we came up with was a show where the students role play the scientist that they researched.
That's awesome.
And get asked like an interview, they have an interview, they get interviewed, they get asked questions about their biggest accomplishments, their biggest regrets maybe.
Yeah.
Tell us about yourself. All those kinds of almost icebreaker questions.
Yes.
But they're taking the role of the scientist. That'll be on our network within a couple of months,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
That kind of stuff, especially on the academic level, and you can speak more to this for elementary, but on the academic level, the possibilities are endless. And as an assessment tool, whether it's like a raw assessment tool or whether it's more informal and just kind of casual, this medium existing is transformative.
Yes. Talked about doing like a tourism. So like we do mission reports. Let's do tourism. Like why should I go visit the Mission San Juan? And the states, right? The fifth graders do states. Yeah. They do a state report. So, all right, you're on the tourism board for the state of Vermont. What are you going to tell me? What are you going to tell people? Why do they need to come to the state of Vermont? And instead of like a child just like writing it all down and doing a report, which writing is very important, but next level, can you articulate what are the highlights of this state? Like, why are people here, right? And so little things like, the population, it's a smaller population. Are you tired of the crowds? And it's like, okay, show me that you understand the population of your state. Show me. You know what I mean? It's that show me piece that we don't always get to do in classroom because we've got so much we've got to do.
That's right.
So it's endless possibilities,
it
right?
Really is,
Kindergarten does community helpers. Yeah. Wouldn't it be great to have some kindergartners sit across from you and interview the fire chief?
That'd be amazing.
I mean, how awesome would that be?
Yeah. Oh my
gosh. Questions would just be so great.
That'd be
endless,
amazing.
Endless possibilities.
I want every time I hear an idea from literally anyone on campus, I feel like I'm just like, green lights all the way down. Let's do it. Let's make it happen.
It's so good. Yeah.
That would be so amazing.
Yeah.
How do we as school leaders then, not necessarily just promote, but how do we support teachers, I think in particular, kind of that's the next layer down to make it happen. How do we support teachers in getting them to use, that's not the right verb for it. But
no, for sure. Yeah. Like actually partaking.
Like utilizing.
Partaking,
yeah.
right?
Yes. Yeah.
So, sometimes we don't like new things. Like they're exciting.
Sure.
We're like, that sounds so great, but I don't necessarily like the way my voice sounds when I'm being recorded and don't know how I'm coming across, right? And teachers are great in front of like 8-year-olds, but you're like, you're gonna blast this to the world, like
it's
people are gonna judge me, right? But
it is a different environment.
But how hypocritical if we tell the kids all the time, we do hard things, but we're not willing to take risks and do hard things.
That's right.
So I think, Joseph, one thing that you and I could do partnering is like just reaching out to teachers and I don't want to say forcing, but like, okay, what's your podcast project going to be for the quarter? And like, here are the dates and times, pick one.
Sure.
Right? And then I think that first leap, I was nervous, but now it's just like conversation. We're just talking.
It's just a conversation, yeah.
As we say in elementary school, NBD, no big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that, and I can absolutely work with you on that schedule-y kind of side of it. How do we feel, or maybe the same question for students?
Yes.
If we have students that are particularly nervous, how do we and teachers encourage and maybe, can they dip their toe in, that kind of thing?
For sure.
What do you say to a student that is like, I'm afraid of microphones,
Yeah. Well, this is, I think for students, it's like you're not even on a microphone. You're not talking to a crowd. So aesthetically, it might alleviate a lot of anxiety for some of our kids, just like we would do with anything. Do you want to bring a friend in? Do you want me to sit with you?
Yeah.
We can edit it. If you say something that you don't like Mr. Jasper can take that out. You get final approval, but we send it out into the world. But you know what? Our kids, unfortunately or not unfortunately, like they want to, I have people that say I want to be a social influencer when I grow up. And so for the most part,
here's your chance. Here's your start.
For the most part, this is what we want to do. I think of my student. I have a student, Chloe Abbott, who was one of my students at Friends Christian Middle School. Yeah. She always wanted to be a sportscaster, right? Which I think that would have been a job that I would have loved, but women weren't doing that back then. But anyway, and she's doing it. Like I see her, she was on a news station in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and she just moved to Oklahoma. And I'm thinking like, this just opens a whole different kind of career choice for some of our kids, whether it's producing, editing, like speaking. It's like a whole new world, like that we hadn't offered before, where kids maybe wouldn't have thought of this prior to it. It would even be great to have some of our kids that are really just great readers come and read like a book, and then say, we're going to play this for the kindergartners while they're taking their nap time today, right? We're going to listen to the podcast.
How precious
right?
would that be?
Okay, this is podcast. We're going to do podcast today. So while they're taking their brain break, laying down, like the teachers are playing the podcast with like a third grade student that read a Dr. Seuss book. Like how beautiful is that?
That's so
right?
fantastic.
Yes.
Yeah, you mentioned several steps in this workflow. The things that go into making a podcast, typically we kind of narrow it down to like there's like a writing side. Like you write like the outline or the script,
for sure.
right?
Yeah.
You record, you would edit, and then you publish. Mm-hmm. And there's obviously multi-steps in each of those, and there's different workflows and stuff. But I was talking with Marcus the previous episode, and we were talking about how, even calling that like a 21st century skill is maybe like an understatement. It's a 21st century workflow.
That's right.
And there's like several 21st century skills being taught like through this whole thing.
Yes.
And not every student, maybe there's some students that just never want to be on a microphone.
Yes.
But they're really good at running GarageBand and editing and cleaning it up.
Or writing.
There's what I love so much about doing this as a workflow as opposed to one monolithic thing is that there are so many entry points for different personalities and interests and stuff like that. At any level, at any age, all of that is possible.
And in the elementary school, and I think in the junior high, we teach standards. We're a standards-based school, which means our students are learning everything they're supposed to learn in first grade to be prepared for second grade, and so on and so on and so on.
Yes.
And these skills that are used in this podcast studio are standards.
Yeah.
There's standards for every grade. Public speaking, persuasive essay, reading fluency. Like, it's not something that we do on top of what we're doing, but we incorporate it into what we're already doing in a new and exciting way to meet the standards.
I love that.
Right? I love it too. It just fits.
That's fantastic.
With what we're doing. So yeah.
Starting to wrap up a little bit, do you see any potential roadblocks, or do you have any particular fears? That's maybe too strong of a word, but anything in the back of your head with a podcast studio opening up really a large new program at the entire school that give you pause as you look at this?
No, I think, we talked earlier about pressing out the world, and I think spirit of comparison is a huge thing, right?
Yeah.
That the enemy goes after. That's why social media is so detrimental. Like, it gets you to compare yourself to things that the Lord never intended you to compare yourself to. And I think that's one of those things where we listen, and maybe someone knocked it out of the park, and someone is more reserved, and maybe they don't feel great about their product in the beginning. But again, like, we do hard things and we learn. We don't just do things that we're excellent at.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
that's right.
Even as a 57-year-old woman, like, I'd prefer to play a sport where I'm going to excel.
Sure.
But I still make myself do things where I'm not going to be great at it because, one, it keeps me humble.
Sure.
And two, it causes me to grow.
Yes.
Right? And so it's all about growth. And so that's not a stumbling block. I think that's an opportunity, but I think that maybe students will feel that. And we just have to be aware of that and meet them in that and be like, no, we got you.
Absolutely.
And I think what would be super cool is, like, look at a student, like, almost have like a podcast portfolio for an elementary kid.
Yes.
And be like, this was your podcast in first grade. This was your podcast in fourth grade.
Yeah.
Look at your podcast in sixth grade. Look what you're producing, right? As a part of their, just part of their portfolio that we put in their file, like on RenWeb or whatever, like, this is your podcast portfolio. Because if we're going to do something, we want to show beginning, middle, and end. We want to show growth. And so I don't want it to be a one-off, check, I did that in third grade. No, let's keep doing it.
Yeah.
So, just working with the teachers and saying, okay, what does podcasting look like for third grade? Yeah. What's the project going to be for second? What is first? Yeah. What's kinder? Maybe it's a small group thing. I don't know. But, I think that my mind just goes crazy when I'm in here.
Mine
it's
too,
so great.
honestly. It's so much fun.
Yeah.
Last question for you. I'm the director of the podcast network here. Yes, you are. And there are a lot of, for lack of a better term, constituents. There's multiple shows, multiple other producers and hosts, and multiple shows every week. My question for you is essentially, number one, do you have any questions for me as the director? And number two, what would you sort of charge me with in terms of tasks or responsibilities to support the podcast network at the elementary school and you and your teachers and your students? Yeah.
First, I just want to say, like, well done. This was a dream and a vision, and there were roadblocks. Like, but you just kept going. Yeah. Like anything that is good. Like, you just kept knocking and going and pushing, and so well done, because I just think it's going to produce a ton of fruit. Yeah. And then I think you're doing a great job of being supportive. Just the one thing that I would share with you is, again, being old and being in this, like, pace yourself. Yeah. Right? I don't want it to become something that becomes a burden to you. Sure. Right? And I think just as far as supporting the elementary, as you and I are talking, I think, like, our next professional development day, it'd be fun for you to come in and be like, okay, let's do grade level goals for podcasts. What's going to look like for kinder? So we're not just random, right? We don't just want randomness.
People kind of just popping in.
Purposeful.
And stuff.
Yeah. So we see that growth and we elevate it as they get older. So
That's fantastic.
It's exciting.
Thank you so much. Yeah. I'll give you the final word. Anything you want to leave our audience with that we haven't talked about today about any of this or anything else entirely?
Yeah. No, I don't have any pearls of wisdom right now.
That's okay.
Except that, I'm excited to be here. Yeah. Thank you so much. You made it easy.
Yeah, absolutely.
It didn't hurt one bit.
That's my job. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Ms. Day. It's an honor. It's a pleasure. So much fun.
Thank you for having me.
This episode has been a production of the Capistrano Valley Christian Schools Podcast Network. Be sure to check out, subscribe to, and leave a review of this show and the other shows on our network on your podcast player of choice. Doing so supports the school community in a multitude of ways. For more information about the CVCS Podcast Network or any of our other shows, check out cvcs.org or email podcasts@cvcs.org. On behalf of the whole network, this is Mr. Jasper saying thank you again for listening and stay tuned for more.